Christopher Sanders. I'm a grad student here at SJSU in Comm Studies, and the analytics team and the analytics lead on the social media team. This is a mentor of mine. He's the social media team originator, SJSU alum, longtime instructor, recent retiree. Most friends get to call him TC. It's Dr. Ted Coopman. Ted, how are you today?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Just excited to finally have a face-to-face with you. I was very amped to meet your wife for the first time in a face-to-face after taking, I guess, it was like 6 classes total from the two of you. So the first thing we'll get into, Ted, I've been dying to ask you this whole time. Are you a Theodore?
No, actually, I am just a straight up Ted. My father's name was Theodore, and when I was born, they weren't expecting a boy, and so they didn't have a name picked out. And so that was a clutch decision at the hospital to name me Ted. So just Ted. That's it.
Not Teddy either?
Previously by some. I'll answer almost any. I mean, I'll answer almost anything, right? So.
Okay, so I know a little bit about where you grew up and how you grew up, but just a tad bit. So can you let everyone else know about your pre-collegiate life?
Well, I was born and raised in Fresno, California, but escaped. It's a good place to be from. And it was, wild times there. I mean, all the terrible police practices that, that have since become mostly outlawed, all were originated in Fresno, So I got my bachelor's degree in theater arts from Fresno State, some of which I remember. And then I moved to Santa Cruz, California, and I spent about 15 years working in restaurants and catering and things like that, as well as I did tree work, I painted houses, I had my own auto detailing business, and a bunch of other things. And then actually was chasing a girl at Humboldt State and ran into a mentor of mine, Gary Melton, who was running the kind of the broadcasting program up there, and worked on the FM station. They have an NPR KHSU, and had a show on that station for a while. And then he convinced me that I should be an academic. And so I moved back down to Santa Cruz in like the middle of the recession. It's like 1990, right? So it's just like the economy, the earthquake has just happened. Everything's trashed. The economy's in the toilet. And
always the best time to move to the Bay Area.
Well, you got no money. Right, it doesn't matter. It's like you got no money. There's no money. And
right after that, if you can catch that upswing, man, you're living good.
Yeah. Well, and actually what I did is the only job I could get was washing cars in the back of a dealership, and then there was an opening for a car sales that I took, and so I suffered through selling cars, Volvos and minivans and Jeeps and stuff like that for 3 years to save up enough money for getting my master's in mass communication at San Jose State. I was in the mass comm journalism program there. Had a real bad experience with academia at that point. Actually, that's when I met Stephanie, because she taught one class. Did she tell you that story? I did one class that semester, and I took her interviewing class, and that's where we met. And so I was the advisor in mass comm, was having a meeting with Stephanie, who is the advisor in comm, and trash talked me to Stephanie. And so I heard all about that, of course. And so I'm like, but at that time I was, I got involved in the micro radio movement, which was media democracy broadly in the 1990s. And what it was is anarchists were starting these unlicensed low power FM stations to try to organize people. And the feds didn't like that very much. And And so that's where I did my thesis on, which they said would go nowhere. And so I got out of being, at the time I was also studying and teaching Pencak Silat, which is an Indonesian martial art, and then like doing catering and working in restaurants and stuff like that. And so I got involved in that movement, and it became like a movement, or it's a national movement. And I mean, at the time, this is like bleeding edge early internet, listserv, having a website, things like that. Internet search did not exist. So you had to have these indexing sites that people would know where that indexing site was, so they could get links to where all the other sites were, because there was no way to find out where anything was, right? And so the FBI didn't even have internet-enabled computers at that point. So there was a heyday there as far as the anarchists were concerned, in terms of organizing. And so it was basically a 10-year battle to try to get low power FM licensed. And we anything like that, we mostly won, because there's like, several thousand 10, 50 watt FM radio stations, community radio stations all across the country. And so that's what I did in the 1990s. And I took my experience with that and what I did my thesis on, and I got an article published in the top journal of my field, which is Journal of Broadcasting and Electronic Media. And so that set me up to apply for a PhD program around the country, because when you apply to PhD programs, you apply everywhere. And but at that point I was older, and so I decided to go. I got several offers. I decided to go to the University of Washington, in Seattle, and then one of the the other main offer I got was actually a Park Fellowship at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which was pretty high wattage. But what they did is that they flew everybody in. They put you in a room with the person you're competing with, because there's like, there's 16 people there and 8 slots. And then they put you through this like grilling thing. And they bring me in for this interview, and they start grilling me on my GRE scores. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And of course, I'm not a 20 something. I'm like a 30, going on 40 something, and have been an activist and all that stuff. And I'm not taking off of anybody. And,
they treated you like it was a pickup basketball game. They said,
well,
here, play for your fellowship.
They were pulling some, some really basic. I'm like, I don't want to be here. And they gave me an offer. They offered me a fellowship, and I refused it. And I would like bump into people there like, you're Ted Coopman, huh? You refuse that stuff. Like, because, your faculty are, that's why I didn't want to go there. And so I went to the University of Washington, and that was a challenge because, of course, again, you're an older student, and a lot of the faculty are like my age. And at the time, there was 100 graduate students in that program, 3 men. It was all women.
Wow.
And so that was a whole political experience. And basically one thing that I've discovered is that any bit of wisdom can be summed up in that, I've done a lot of questionable things in my life, that in a wide spectrum of what is questionable, but what I regret is not what I've done, but what I didn't do. Not speaking up, not doing the right thing, not speaking truth, right? And so I did that, and that had its consequences, for sure. And I won't get into all that, the gory details of that, right? But then again, I came out of that program in 2007. We're right in the middle of the recession, right? So, and then Stephanie got pulled back into, after being basically sent into exile. They pulled her back in to run the department as everything was falling apart during the recession. And then I kind of skated. Another mentor I had, who was the chair of RTVF, brought me in to teach a couple of classes for them. And then I got a couple of classes in comm. And then eventually I transferred full-time to comm, because if you are part-time in one department and then part-time in another department at San Jose State, that does not equal full-time. You're still part-time. So you have to be full-time in
bureaucracy of college, right?
And so then I moved into being full-time in comm. So that's the story of that.
Man, you answered like 4 questions I had all in one. I'm happy you did that.
Ah, trying to save you
um,
time.
hey, maybe I wanted to spend more time with you. Um, so how? A better question I have is, what's your FBI profile look like?
I don't know. I haven't asked. I haven't asked. Although I got to tell you, man. Okay. This is a funny story. So I'm in the middle of this. This is like the probably maybe 97. Um, and we're like in the thick of it. And the thing is, if you're broadcasting illegally with a little transmitter or whatever, what they do is they issue an arrest warrant against your transmitter piece of equipment, right? Which because what it keeps it from being criminal law, it makes it administrative law, which you have no rights. And so what happens is that when they go to take your radio station down, they bring in federal marshals, like with assault weapons and like full intrusion gear. I mean, it's pretty crazy, pretty intense.
You
And
got
then
raided?
it's like, whoa, they come in, it's like, great, you spent how many, tens of thousands of dollars on this exercise. Actually, what happened is that they came in and they did that at Free Radio Santa Cruz. And then they didn't notify the cops ahead of time. And then the cops in Santa Cruz are like, look, we beat up our own anarchists. We don't appreciate the feds coming in and beating up on our anarchists because they're ours. They didn't provide them any security, and they cut all the tires for all the federal marshals, right? And so they had to bring in tow trucks to have them all towed away. And we're talking to seize like $2,000 maybe versus with this handmade bespoke broadcasting equipment. They're back on the air in a week. But anyway, so I'm at the place I'm renting, and I'm out there doing yard work, and a couple of friends of mine had given my name to the Mormons, right? That I wanted to talk to them, and so these two guys walk up, clean cut, 3-piece suits, very white. And they walk up, they go, "Are you Ted Coopman?" I'm like, here it comes. Here it comes. I tried to think of like, what have I done recently? And it's like, and then I saw the name tag and I literally just like almost collapsed. I'm like, oh, thank God you're Mormons. Oh my God. And they're like, what? And they're like, and I explained what probably happened. They go, that's not very nice. And I said, I don't think that's very nice either. Right. So I don't know. I don't know what my federal profile is, considering all the what got burned up on the internet doing organizing. But we did. One thing is that we proved proof of concept, because anything you see in media now, as far as interactive media sites, where you can like anybody can upload stuff and there's conversation stuff like that. That got pioneered, file sharing, 1997. That got all pioneered by the anarchists in the free media movement, a media democracy movement, and sharing files between radio stations and all that kind of stuff. So it was very much bleeding edge, and we proved that you could deliberate and you could get things done in a digital environment. I walked into my very first class in graduate school. And the guy was like the big, he was like he was big on jury deliberation. And we started this class. It was literally the first day of class. And he's like, well, you have to be in person. You cannot effectively deliberate via email or listserv in a digital environment. And I'm like raising my hand. I'm like, you're wrong. And everyone's like, what? You just told the professor that he's wrong. I'm like, I've been doing this for like 10 years. And I happen to know we forged a national movement. I put together a joint statement on micro radio because we had like, libertarian right churches and anarchists, and we had to come up with something that we could give the FCC. And I wrangled that agreement, and we deliberated it, and we came up with it, and that went to the FCC. And we did that on a listserv nationally. There are people all over the country. And so, and that was a major achievement for us and a proof of concept. And it really is, it's kind of interesting because everyone's talking about social media and it's like, oh wow, it's this whole new thing and organizing online. And we're all like, whatever, And then of course, what happened is 9/11 happened because the global justice movement and the big protests in Seattle and Baltimore and Washington, DC, and we were really rolling. And then 9/11 happened. And just like what always happens, they didn't go after the Islam. They didn't go after the terrorists. They came after the leftists, and they came at us hard. And so we all scattered, basically. We're like, oh my God, the jig is up. Here come the feds, because they could do basically almost anything at that point with the Patriot Act.
Exactly.
And so a bunch of us went to graduate school. So that's what happened. That's happened in the 60s as well. It's the exact same thing that happened in the 1960s. Crackdown came in the 70s. All the activists went to graduate school. So
yeah, and after that happened, eventually now they come after academia. Thanks a lot.
Academia is in the process of suscepq of killing itself anyway. So.
All right, Ted. So I don't think it's a shocker to anyone, but you've lived the dream of many college students.
Oh God!
You wound up marrying one of your professors.
I earned my A in that class, actually, and then we started hanging out later, and so that's
I've heard the story.
Yeah.
But
I couldn't believe she was interested in me. I'm like, what? Really? What?
Yeah. She told me. She said one of your friends had to basically hit you upside the head and say she likes you, dummy.
I'm like, oh wow, what? She wants me to go to visit her brother in Santa Barbara, and I don't know what that means. He's like, you're an idiot. It's obvious what come on, dude. I'm like, oh, yeah. So, no, there was never too bright in that regard. Yeah.
Hey, you can't have all the gifts, right?
Yeah, very few. So I'm trying.
So how was it like basically having a career for the last decade, 15 years or so with your wife and publishing with her and building up this base of academia that you guys both have together?
Well, it's it's 24/7, and for a long time I was working for her. She was department chair and I was a faculty member, and so everything had to go through the dean. Anything that happened,
you already worked for her anyway.
Yeah, well, so we won't get into that, right? But the thing is like she's the oldest, right? She's firstborn, and I'm the youngest in my family by a long shot. And it's funny because our best friends are also the oldest and the youngest as well. And birth order matters. Matter in terms of your temperament, because as the youngest, survival dictates you have to be the observer. So you watch what your siblings are doing, then you're like, oh, I'm not going to do that. That obviously did not work, and you kind of keep a low profile. But yeah, it really, it could be really challenging at times because her father was an academic. I'm a first generation college student. And so, but her family, her father was a big time academic and doing all that stuff. And so, it was, I learned a lot, doing stuff with Stephanie. And we were able to get quite a bit done, which is really what it comes down to. That's the one, some people just go through the motions, but I like getting stuff. As an activist, I'm all about deliverables. I'm like, at the end of the day, you live in a physical world. You got to make decisions based on, because my background originally was in policy, media law and policy, right? And so all policy is going to fail to some extent, but you just basically, you get to a point where you have to act. And that's the problem with academia, is with academics, you very rarely get to the point where you have to act. It's talking about, thinking about, theorizing about maybe doing something. And so I'm wanting to do stuff. And so that was kind of the main motivation. And her early entry into online teaching, and then building up that capacity. I literally gave talks to the faculty, and this is post 2007, that they were just amazed at students turning in work electronically instead of on paper. How's that? I'm like, okay, all right. Actually, there's a lot of affordances to that as opposed to the physical paper. And it's like being an instructor is not handing out paper syllabi at the beginning of the semester. It's not like your primary, or having a chalkboard. We had faculty who fought to keep chalkboards versus whiteboards in some of the classes because they were big on the chalk thing. So it's really, academics are always way behind the curve when it comes to that.
Is that why I still use my CD player in the car? Is it because I'm gonna have an academic
Well, I
mindset?
mean, you're invested in the platform, right? You got a bunch of CDs. I still got a ton of DVDs I haven't even done because I got Max. I'm like, it won't run the DVD. So you're invested. Buy paper books, right? So, but no. So it was. It's something that really. It gave me a lot of perspective. I got to meet. She really networked me, and I got to be introduced to a lot of people, um, and a lot of really, really interesting, smart people all over the country. And that was cool. Yeah, and then, we were able to work on some stuff, some different articles, and we serving in different academic organizations, because I was on the executive board of the Association of Internet Researchers, as a graduate student representative, and then as an at large representative as well. Um, and then we were involved with the American Communication Association, which actually had one of the first online open access journals, and she was a journal editor for that. And then I was on the executive board there. Got a firsthand uh, experience in academic politics from some people who are very skilled and very, very ruthless, right? So I'm like, wow, that's and I'm kind of the thing is, I'm kind of, when it comes to, because it's all that is text-based online for listserv, and I am now fully versed in the dark arts of listserv combat as far as how that works. And that was hard lesson learned. I'm like, holy, I can't even believe that just happened. But the joke about academia is never have so few fought hard over so little, right? So.
Mm-hmm. So to continue on the topic of publishing, you've had a lot of work published in, I would say, a relatively short amount of time, considering how your time frame was from when you got your master's to your doctorate degree till now. I would say you've been actually a lot of tangibles, as you were pointing to, that you have. So what advice would you give to current students and trying to get published?
Well, I was the publishing environment was different and has become different as, they become less Luddite, in terms of getting published in a journal, and going through the process. I mean, it generally takes, if you're going to publish something in most journals, things that get published are historical, because the data and everything was collected is probably 2 years out of date minimum, because it takes so long to get through the peer review process. So I was lucky. I got those publications with just my master's, and that got me a lot of funding and opportunities as a graduate student, so the PhD program, and then getting things published. And it really is a matter of knowing your journals and what they are, where they are in the hierarchy, because not all journals are created equal. I was also lucky for my dissertation. I got I got a publication in Critical Studies and Media Communication, which is the other top journal in media for
Nice.
COM. And that is like a 9% acceptance rate. And that was really fortunate. But the thing is, a lot of it is just, latest, greatest, biggest, best, the sex value, right? It has a lot of sex. It's like, ooh, very sexy. This is a new thing, and so people always pile into it because they want to be in the latest thing, right? So my big advice is that you should be, if you want to get into a PhD program, right, you should have some publications in the works, right? Which means that you need to be, at any one time, if you're serious about it, you should be in multiple stages. You should be in the conceptual stage of what you're going to be looking at next, right? What you're going to be studying next, how are you going to go about it? Then you should be collecting data and be in the active investigative phase. And you should be in the writing phase and or writing and revision phase at the same time. You should always have something coming up, something in the works, something that you're writing up, and or something that you're that you're working on publication, because the revise and resubmit process goes on and on. They'll send you back stuff, then you have to rewrite it, and then you have to send it to them, and then they send it back to you. And I mean, you could have like multiple rounds of that easily. And so that's the biggest advice, right?
Still got a landline there, Ted, I see.
Yeah. It's a package deal, right?
I was going to say you don't trust the towers or what?
I like to diversification in technology. Just like everyone is into like having everything networked together. But the problem is, if you have everything networked together, you have one point of failure, right?
Yeah.
If it gets into your system, it destroys everything. So the idea that I've got my iPad, my the phone, and then the computer, and they're tenuously, like the calendars are synced, but that's just about it for me. And the landline is just kind of came with the package on the cable. So
you said throw it on there. I got another $10 a month.
Well, it gives me a local area code too. So it does give me a local
true.
area code. Yeah.
So we're gonna talk about something sadder. Now, I definitely felt a certain way reading your academic narrative when you got to the part about the social media team, because you gave me my first job on the social media team, and then you weren't leading the social media team anymore, which was a lovely series of emails that we went through together. And that was my first big experience with the bureaucracy involved with universities and instructors and that side of it. I dealt with the student side enough with all the different offices and dealing with their nonsense, but I never saw it on the professor side.
Yeah, they hate you as much as they hate us, basically.
They hate everybody.
We are inconvenient. Students are inconvenient. Faculty are inconvenient to administration and staff. But the two primary things, the problem with it is that there is a matter of the way power is articulated, and that there's no system of accountability. And that's our primary problem writ large, is the lack of accountability. And especially within academia, is that there are consequences for students, right? And there are consequences for faculty of a different sort, but there's no consequences for administration or staff. And so you really need somebody. The point of a hierarchy is that you have somebody who could step in to referee, to be like, you stepped over the line. But the thing is, expediency, rules. And so what happened, the academic political situation in the department and the factionalism is partially driven by epistemological considerations, right? And that is that there is people have different worldviews, right, as far as how things happen, and what the focus should be. And generally speaking, some departments are ideologically rigid. You see that a lot in poli-sci, is that there's a particular, or actually not, actually economics. Economics is really like, blood sport. There are factions, and anthropology can be that way too, between cultural and physical anthropology. And so those are some departments, people work well together, other departments, they don't. And unfortunately, people who subscribe to critical theory or cultural studies and its offshoots, it's not
the biggest subject here at San Jose State. It's not exactly our focal point.
Well, the thing is, it is the total focal point of the comm department currently, because people are that critical cultural, and that brings up a certain worldview, is that, race has to be central, race, gender, class has to be central in everything, and that it is magically it is a subdiscipline, it is a theory, it is an epistemological viewpoint. And you get to the point to where people are wedded to it in a quasi-religious sense. So the thing is, if you are not a believer, then that is something that is fundamentally wrong with you as far as your perspective. And Stephanie might have mentioned the fact that, as a woman in academia, if she doesn't take an explicitly feminist perspective on everything, that's seen as problematic. It would be like for an African American, it's like, wow, how come you're an African American academic? Why aren't you looking at issues of race And the African American experience, like, I don't know, because I'm a chemist. I don't know. What am I doing? I had, it's that expectation, and it's like, it's so funny. It's like, that's so weirdly racist, right? That people would come up to you with that, right?
That's so weird that you had that experience with the department, and on the student side, I feel like it's the complete opposite. Like in grad school, I can't. There's no critical cultural anything class. There's no critical race class. I might not take one during my entire time as a grad student here. And,
well, it's because
and even in undergrad, when we talk about real diversity, we are diverse in a sense, but I think there's one non-white male lecturer, or I think there's a couple lecturers, but there's only one faculty member that's a non-white male. I think it's Felipe Gomez, if I'm not mistaken. And other than that, I mean, we do have diversity in women, but for a epistemological perspective that says critical race is a certain thing, there sure isn't as much representation here as they are preaching on your side.
Well, because it's the hypocrisy of it, right? It's not, the thing is, they're not. It doesn't. I mean, that's the show. The performance studies, it's the performance, right? They're performing it, and it's very convenient. But like in my case, right, is that at the central of this is power analysis, right? Yeah. So you have to do a power analysis. And so I got dumped on with this idea that I am somehow inherently, I'm in a position of power where I have no power in that department. And so that was an extreme exercise of unbridled exercise of power, against me as someone who is really as a lecturer, has no standing and power in the department and is completely at the mercy. I mean, the union contract protects me to a certain degree, but obviously not very much. Just to go back recently, the problem with, especially males of people of color in academia is a pipeline problem. And the thing is that everybody the only person in our department, there's only two people in our department who've been in the department since I've been there that are actually real live, what you consider to be minority population, right? And Marquita Bird is one. Mm-hmm. And then Rona Halalani, even though she's, of course, because you have to be 100% Hawaiian in order to be really Hawaiian, not really Hawaiian, and then it's a one drop rule on the other side. I don't know. But anyway, they're all imports. Nikki is not an American, right? She wasn't, she's like an African who is in America right now, not an American.
I call them African Americans. I prefer black.
Well, that's the whole thing. If you're Jamaican, Stephanie's brother is like, he's Jamaican. And so it's like, he's like, and we know a lot of Haitians too. And they're like, no, that is not us. So black is the preferred, but
she's an African American.
Yeah, no, it's, actually just as a quick aside, I knew somebody in graduate school, Patty Jean Hooper, Army brat, right? She was actually born at a military installation in Africa and then got transferred to Alabama and went into the school talking with this African-American woman who was at the school, talking about her and, asking her a bunch of questions. And she said, she said that, she goes, "Oh, I'm an African American." She's like really white. I mean, like white. I mean, even whiter than this. She goes like, "I'm an African American." And the woman kind of stepped back and be like, it's like, "Girl, that is no." She goes, "Well, I was born in Africa and I'm an American. How come I'm not an African American?" Right? And she had to like get explain. I mean, you're like 9, right? She had to get that explained. But the point is that what you do, Priya, Luis Felipe, Gao, they're foreign nationals, right? They might be American citizens now, but when they were hired, they were foreign nationals. They are elites as a majority group in their respective countries. They come in, but they count, right, as being not white. And so that brings up your diversity quotient. Doesn't do very much for the actual minority population that is here. And of course, as far as the black population is concerned, you have a K through 12 problem. And so there's no pipeline. I mean, ultimately that is the problem. But what it does do for those of you who do get into the pipeline is that I had somebody, so I went to this conference one time and a woman was presenting, and she's black, disabled. She's, permanently in a wheelchair, um, lesbian, right? And her talk was the power of the token, right? And I also know some Native American scholars as well, and it's really conflicting, right? It's like, well, I get a lot of disadvantages for this, so why wouldn't I go ahead and leverage that status to get what I want? Because it's all, it's full contact out there, and so why wouldn't you do that, right? So there is some advantages, but like a friend of mine, Maria Garrido, who's actually a Mexican national, when she was in my graduate program, they were telling her, he's like, female, minority hire, you're going to be fine. And she's like, I'm not a minority. Don't call me a minority. I'm from Mexico. I'm a Mexican. Therefore, I am not a minority because we're all Mexicans in Mexico, right?
And you're not there anymore.
Yeah, she used to be so pissed off. Used to piss her off. And I mean, that's the complexity of it, which unfortunately, by the time it's filtered down into academic politics, the nuances kind of, which is why I like the conversations that you and I have, and Marquita and I have as well, or actually to a certain extent with Federico Verona, but he's from Spain, right? So he's not, he's Hispanic in that sense, but he's actually literally from Spain.
Completely different.
Yeah, no, you have completely. That's not the experience. That is not the experience that Marquita versus Nikki, right? Versus you.
Yeah,
that is a different, planetary. That's a different planet they're coming from, but the nuance gets lost, and so it's kind of running back to the idea of the critical cultural perspective. It's just the idea of epistemological purity in terms of how you're approaching reality, and scholarship, or the way classes should be taught, and it's amazing that, because that's kind of a lefty thing when you go back to Stuart Hall, like the origins of it all.
Oh yeah.
It was very anti-colonial. It was very much, about emancipatory, but it really has been weaponized. And people will use it, what I call to woke wash stuff, which is like they're taking something and then they're going to give it that glaze. So that means that if you go be like, well, I don't want to do that, or I don't see a rationale, then you're a racist, right? Or you're unwoke, or other problems with you. And I just don't find that very collegial or productive. And if you're on the thing is they outgroup you, right? And within the department, within academia broadly, but also within departments, you have factionalism, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes very clear who's in and who is out. And the people who are in get the benefits of that, and the people that are out get fucked. And, the thing is that they were willing to discipline me, right? They were willing to destroy that program, They stepped in, and that destroyed my career. When they pulled that move, that destroyed my career, because I had a whole program of research that was associated with that. So,
and in a ton of ways, they have done their best to do it, without making it look like it, with a sleight of hand.
There was no subtlety there at all. I mean, honestly, I just don't, they never had, I couldn't get them interested in the social media team at all. The entire development of the social media team, Stephanie helped launch that. And then they deposed her and they put in Deanna. And I mean, this is like, faculty that are now teaching online. When the first idea of teaching online they came on, they've actually published, Deanna and Andy Wood have a published piece saying that you cannot teach online. It's not real pedagogy. It's not real teaching, right? And it's like it was always over my dead body. And so there's all this pushback on that, and then not really seeing the value of the internet, or digital media or anything like that, or social media, and trying to do anything, and having to fight just to get just to get the space in order to develop that, and getting no help and getting no funding on it at all. And then to kind of organically build that up, mostly through the work of students. The thing is, I was there as the anchor, but all the work in the social media team, everything that happened to develop that up was almost exclusively students. And that is what was hurtful to me, is that so many students had put so much work, sincere, hard work for nothing. I mean, you know how instrumental you get as a student, you have to be instrumental. And we're talking like one unit, and they're like putting in like massive hours and on the management team, and developing training, and then developing, um, uh, organizational management structure, strategic plan, really looking at what's going on in the industry, which is what I brought. It's like, look, you have to really put this in context. What are social media companies doing? What are companies that use social media doing? And then telling them, it's like, they don't know what they're doing. So there's no pressure there. This is the idea that they're kind of working in there. And then you have to look at, okay, what's problematic about this? What works? How are we doing this? What's the proper way to push media through different channels, right? Facebook is not Twitter, is not Instagram, and it's not Tumblr, it's not, Vine back in the day, or whatever. And how do you do that? And so a lot of that on the ground expertise on social media is by students who actually are involved with it, right? And really know deeply about social media, and have learned the hard, for the most, especially in the early days, learned the hard way. In 2009, when I asked my students in my media class what were their settings or security settings on Facebook and the rationale for them, 2/3 did not even know there were security settings on Facebook. No. And I mean, that generation just got screwed as far as all the stuff that's generation. Out there. Well, the thing is, it's all out there, right? It's all out there.
I gotta go find my old MySpace now.
It's too late. It's too late. That train has sailed. But yeah, so I mean, and that is what really grieved me, is that this was something, trying to get them to accept students as partners in a collaborative process for learning, and to engage them in a non-coercive way, right? Because it's amazing how fast people that are supposedly so left, woke, critical cultural thing, they'll go to coercion like that. If they can force it, if they can discipline, if they can punish you. And what happened to me is that we went through this whole like crazy thing. And I was trying to explain to them, I'm like, anybody can't run this team. You need to have the training and the background and the research and to know what's going on broadly to run the team, which they didn't believe, because it's a conceit that what they do is complex, but what you do, a trained monkey could do, right? They don't care. Yeah. And so even at that point, and Matt Spangler stepping in because he wanted the class off and he wanted to run it. And I'm like, I've got enough students involved in this, because I had 50 students at the time, because I built the team from like 9 students to 50 students, is that he was like, I don't care. I just want the class off. And I'm like, that's fine. I don't need the credit. I don't need the class off. I've got enough students to buy me out for it, right? And then we both went to Deanna Fassett, the chair at the time, with that deal, and she said no, knowing that would destroy it, not caring. And basically because we'd had some conflicts between her and Stephanie and I in the past, some crazy stuff. The dean, when Deanna was getting reelected to be chair, we went to the dean, we gave our input, and we're seriously concerned because she, during her entire time there, she never hired a lecturer that did not come out of the master's program that she was the graduate coordinator for, right? She never, not one. And so she wasn't bringing on like, I've got a PhD, but I'm a lecturer, not bringing on any PhD lecturers. And we're like, that's concerning to us. And I still think that Walt just basically told her that we were really concerned about that, because Deanna's husband emailed Stephanie and I to tell us what terrible people we were. And so we had to file a grievance, and there's this whole
Oh,
thing that went
man.
on. Yeah. And so at the tail end, that was taking me out was completely, there's no justification other than personal vindictiveness. So, and that's what the thing is, and it flew. None of my colleagues, people that I'd known, I mean, I'd been there. I was talking to Andy Wood at NCA when he was applying for his job there. I remember Anne-Marie Todd's first interview when she showed up to interview to do her job talk. I've known all those faculty members for years, sometimes even over decades, right? And then some faculty that, you know, were lecturers and now they're faculty members or whatever. And in that environment, when that was going down, objectively, obviously, not one backed my action, right? To protect me or to say that this is wrong. Not a single faculty member stood up, tenure track faculty member.
Wow.
You know, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. I'm like, that's one of the reasons I retired, right? You know,
Yeah.
I was just like, I wasn't on track to do it. The opportunity came up, but I was already like done. I'm like, I can't even, you know, what am I doing? You're making my job harder. I'm trying to teach my classes. I was trying to do this other thing. And now, you know, and that's the nature of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is, because something like that generally wouldn't happen in the private sector because there are protections.
Yeah. Yeah.
In academia, no. And so, yeah, so that's the reality of what happened.
And that's what I'm signing up for, huh?
You have to go in. The thing is that the graduate school is designed to break you. It's designed to break you and to have you put up with jump through a lot of flaming hoops, and get you used to abysmally low pay and no respect. So you're ready to be a faculty member. And then it's just the luck of the draw. There's a lot of really great departments. I mean, even my old department in Mass Comm, when Bob Rucker, who was actually on my committee, he took over as chair, it changed that department. Under Stephanie, it really changed the department as well, because she was all about, you know, supporting lectures and then people making decisions. She made decisions based on what's best for students. And that's why they deposed her, because that's what she was doing. And, you know, it was students first because that was what you're supposed to be. And faculty wanted faculty first, right? They don't look at they don't look at demand for, look at who they've hired. It's not based on demand. Do you see an overwhelming demand in the department for, I don't know, critical health communication or maybe performance studies? Non-existent, right? It's not. Okay, this is the thing is, I'm a lecturer. We're in the middle of Silicon Valley, and I'm the only digital media person on the faculty. I was the only one. And for years, I'm like, you've got to hire faculty in this, because if I go, you've got nothing. Yeah. So what happened? I leave. That's it. You know, some people can dabble in it, you know, but as far as someone who's like, this is my area, I publish, I do research, I'm involved in the academic community on it, I've got the experience, I teach the classes. We got nothing, right? Because they didn't want it, because because they wanted to chase performance studies, because that was like the latest, greatest thing. And they really weren't interested in, you know, in where student demand was. There's no student. I mean, there's a ton of demand for social media in the department.
Yeah, and
the
demand nothing. for performance studies is in performance studies. There's
no.
there's a whole other department for that.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not even. Go to theater arts. I mean, that's always been my attitude. I'm like, that's fine, respect, but go to theater arts, because I was in theater arts, radio, television, film, and theater, right? So
yeah.
It's like, that's not, but they just call it something else. And there, you can do a lot of good work in performance studies if you're serious and social scientific, but that is a very small percentage. David Terry, who used to be in the department, is that kind of performance studies. He's not a playwright, which is what Spangler is. David Terry was a scholar, and he did research. He collected data. Andevier's Smith. You know what I'm talking about? Actress, she did all those interviews around the rebellion, 1990 LA riots rebellion, and she went and she
Okay.
talked to a bunch of people, and then it became like a performance piece for her. I mean,
Mhm.
that's serious um, anthropology, ethnography stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But why would you call it performance studies when
Exactly.
it's like you're going to get up and like
We have
do an
other fields for that.
you're going to do an interpretive reading of it. It's like,
Look, we have
it
journalism, mass media.
well, it's the idea of the thing is of voice, right? As an academic, you get a lot of voice, but this whole focus on the voice of the academic, that's not my job. My job is to give voice to the people that I'm studying, that are within that
Yeah.
milieu, to be like, to give them the voice. And I've done my own autoethnography stuff. I've got some book chapters that was all about my role as an academic in a social movement and how
Hmm.
that rolled out, right? So that's autoethnography in a lot of ways, but I wouldn't call myself an autoethnographer, and I think most autoethnography is they're novelists. I mean, it's very, again, it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
about them. And so
Yeah.
even to the point of when I was writing for what I did in the micro radio movement, the media democracy movement, I was writing about my experience in the movement, but it was about the movement. The point was to explain the process and how I interfaced with that movement. And it was not about my personal feelings or anything like that. I
Yeah.
don't, that's not, I got plenty of privilege. I got plenty of privilege. I don't, that's not what I should be focusing on. So,
That's one of the toughest things in sociology is dealing with your own ethnography, your autoethnography, and dealing with the contrast of either not writing about it at all, so you have less bias toward whatever you're writing about, or on the other end of the spectrum, trying to check your own bias at the door. I read a lot.
impossible.
I read a lot from Hurston about that type of thing and her quote unquote struggles with it, if you will.
Yeah. You
Um,
just have to own, I mean, you're the sum total of your experience, right?
yeah,
I will never
yeah,
know what your experience is, and you will never know, even though, white male culture is like dominant in the United States,
hmm,
you don't know anything about me. And so you have to lose the conceit that you know.
yeah,
And that's why you collect data, and that's why you get, as a social scientist, I'm a qualitative social scientist, but you have to take things as a whole and try to find out the best representation of reality that you can put forward while acknowledging the fact that you have a limited viewpoint. The
hmm,
problem is when you spend half your paper flogging your own individual, how you identify yourself and your pronoun or whatever you're doing, when nobody really cares. Like, get to the meat. It's like, cut to the chase and get to the meat of it. Um, and realize that it's all knowledge is provisional, right? It's going to
yeah,
change over time, and it's going to be different. And then just try to give people a fair shake. And then because the tough part is that when you're really involved with people and then you have to write about them, I
yeah,
struggle with a lot of stuff because some people can be real assholes, and you're like, just telling the facts of this really makes this person come off as
yeah,
an, so
yeah,
what is my responsibility here? These are real people, right?
yeah,
So what can and so that is really the struggle of thinking about what the purpose of your writing and your research is, right? Is it more action based? Is it more uh, just informational and historical documenting it? Are you making an argument? Are you trying to point out something that is a problem? What are you doing, right? What's the purpose of what's your thesis for broadly, not just specifically, but broadly for what you're doing. Like my stuff is very, I mean, I identify as an anarchist. I see myself as I'm an anarcho pragmatist, right? And I dealt with that anarchists a lot. Um, and so my view of things is highly critical and very much based on power, and how, that interaction. because you can't not look at social movements, protests, and collective action without really taking a serious look at that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not a critical theorist. I'm not a cultural studies person. Although the joke about, of course, the original cultural studies program that was founded in the UK by Stuart Hall does not exist anymore.
Mm.
It's because everything is culture. It's like the internet. Everything is, the internet is everything, right? So it's like, well, can we really talk about it anymore?
Exactly.
And cultural studies has been thoroughly baked into almost any field, right? And so you have to take that in. It's basically, we stole it from anthropology. And so,
It's
yeah.
baked in, but it's like a facade. It's like a
Well, I
gingerbread
mean,
house of it. A
it's
lot
a,
of it. It's not when I deal with it, even in this program, I'm like, yeah, but now I have to black explain everything to you that we're talking about as the only black student here in this program.
yeah, that's, I mean, Marquita was saying, she's like, I can't fix everything. I'm supposed to be the healer because I'm the black person here, speaking for black people, speaking for black women everywhere, I would have to say, and the whole point is that it's like people are trying, white people mostly, people they're like trying so hard, but it's like, you're trying so hard that you're actually popping out on the racism spectrum. You're kind of popping out on the other side of the racism spectrum because and then the whole idea of like, you have to kind of explain, what that experience is, whether you're the immigrant experience or the, the black experience or whatever, regardless of the fact that your black experience is similar to other black experience, but not the black experience, because you are actually, and this is a problem with identity politics, right? And what I've argued since the 90s, that identity politics is incredibly toxic, because who really refined identity politics? Nazis. So it's like, it really is something that is a trap, and as much as it is emancipatory, because it reduces you to something you have no control over. I had no control over being born white and male and straight. You had no control being black and male, and you have a white, I think you have marriage and kids and stuff.
Yeah, I'm straight.
Straight. Yeah. So, I mean, but it's like, I did not be like, am I going to be straight or gay? Let me think of, it's not, and it's supposed to be about the content of your character, right?
Exactly.
And what you've done, and being judged, just judge me on what I do and what I say, not what I am. And identity politics is all about what you are, as being defined by yourself or being defined by others. But the difference is, to me, is that, okay, are you living in somebody else's box, or are you building your own box? I want out of the box. My point is, I want out of the box. I'm in this like box with a Zoom box, right? I want out of the box. That's the point, right?
You and everyone else. The last thing I'll say about this subject, and then we have one more question for you. The last thing I'll say is that I had a professor this semester, and I'm big into critical cultural, but I'm in the Stuart Hall book of thought, right?
Yeah.
I'm very much very straightforward and academic and to the point. And I had to convince this professor. We were going back and forth. We were talking about our epistemology at the beginning of the semester, and I was trying to explain to her like why I write about what I want to write about, which is a lot about Black imagery in media. It's intercultural in media and critical cultural, but it's mostly from a Black. I mean, I can't help but to write about what I know. This is what got me into loving comp. So I was trying to explain to her. She was like, but you can't, she said that to me, you can't spend your whole career trying to explain things to white people. And I was like, no, you don't get it. I don't care about explaining things to white people. That's not what I'm more about educating my own people so that they understand the power that mass media has and what imagery has. And a lot of kids don't understand that. I had to set that in her mind, like her brain couldn't understand what I was getting towards, because that is what the narrative is. Like her as a field, well, I'll leave her own name, as the field that she teaches in, explaining to white people whatever your denomination is that doesn't fit the dominant culture is how she perceives it. And I was like, I'm not interested in that at all. You got me wrong.
That's why, I mean, that's the crux of it, right? Is that when people talk about, it's like, it's not always about you.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm sorry, it's not always, it's just like, well, white lives matter too. I'm like, it's not about you. And don't, it's weird. Always like, it'll come back about, white people or male people or
Man,
straight
Black
people,
Lives
whatever.
Matter messed up, man. They should have just took all lives matter. Then what would they have had in return? There would have been no counter, sir.
Yeah, but that's the whole idea. So it's
Yeah,
not about that's
yeah.
really what it all comes back. And the thing is, with academics, it tends to all come back to, unless you take specific. And the thing is, honestly, when I was doing martial arts, I was also hanging out with Qadiri Rafai Sufis and doing Sufic practice. And, so really got to know, looked at the Quran and was doing the whole thing, zikr and the whole turning thing and really involved in that. And their attitude is I didn't have to be Muslim to be involved in that. But so you work on your own shit, right? And it's that idea that you polish the mirror of your heart to reflect the light of Allah upon the world, right? And so it's that idea of like, of trying to, of getting out, you polish it to get the shit off of it, because it's the idea of Allah is broadly not you, right? So you don't have to really believe in like the guy or whatever, or even buy into that, right? But it's that whole idea that you are in your way, right? And as an academic, because we're so focused in the PhD program, the ego involved and having to focus on it cripples you. It emotionally and mentally cripples you as an academic. And so if you don't have any grounding in terms of how to get beyond that, it all comes back to you anyway, right? And so like for me with students, I'm like, okay, as a first generation college student and as someone, I had to work to go to school. And so my point is that I don't start with me, I start with you. So I want to find a way to connect what I need to teach you with your lived experience, because otherwise you have no context to understand anything. I can't just throw stuff at you and hopefully it'll stick. And so that's kind of the point. And part of that is that I need to get out of my way to try and do that, right? And let people experience the discovery of and get excited about knowledge. That's the problem, is that being a student is a drag. I mean, they've made it hellish to be a student. So students can't wait to get out of college instead of really understanding and taking that opportunity to think deeply about things that they haven't really thought about before. And so basically I want to open up the hood of the car and be like, hey, this is the engine, this is how it works,
Yeah, exactly. I have gotten into many conversations with, since I've returned to academics and figured out that I wanted to do it as a career path. I had to explain to many people like that the point of higher education has nothing to do with getting a job. I mean, unless you're going to go be an astrophysicist or something like that, the rest of it is, and even your GEs, I had to explain to someone that the point of it is to open your brain up. It's to let you experience the world and give you a more rounded worldview that's elevated beyond what you got through K through 12. So the last question I'm going to ask is, how's retirement going? What are you doing in retirement? You going to return to teaching?
Well, I actually teach one class still at the University of Louisville in Kentucky.
Okay.
It's a writing class on global media, and I've been teaching it for years, just for like extra money.
I saw you've been doing. Is the money good?
And they pay better than San Jose State does, actually.
A lot of people do.
Yeah. But so it's just, I'm just like keeping my hand in with it. It's a little bit hard having just one class out there. And I really miss like the 181F, the new media class. And even though the 151I class was really a grind for me as well as students. And then of course, all the social movement stuff, I'm constantly looking at all the social movement stuff that's going on. I'm like, that's another thing. Nobody in the department's left. Anne Marie Todd, that's her area. But from a rhetorical perspective, which is mostly looking at what people say, not what people do. But she's not teaching any classes because she's chair. So there's nobody covering any of that, right? Really. The 179 class a little bit.
I wonder who talked about the Reddit thing, right?
Yeah. But yeah, so basically, when I moved up here in 2016, they've got neighborhood associations in Oregon and in Eugene. So you have defined areas, and you have a board, and it's not like a homeowners association because it's renters and homeowners and businesses, anybody that's in your area or Jefferson West Side. And it is, and so you wrangle land use, in terms of land use hearings, and then we built a dog park, and we do volunteer work at the park, and then there's a wide variety of things. And one of the things, of course, right now is the impact of homelessness. And so I got dragooned into eventually being chair of my neighborhood association. And so it's developing the media, right? So we have a monthly e-news, then we have biannual physical newsletters that go out because that's expensive. And, we maintain the website. And so that has really been taking a lot of my time because the homelessness situation here is really intense because we're a fairly small, we're about the metro, there's Springfield, which is right next door to us. It's a little over 200,000 people. We're about 170, 180,000 people in Eugene. And we've got, between 4,000 and 8,000 homeless people.
Wow, that's a pretty high percent.
And we've got a lot of really good social service. I mean, you see like Cahoots, which is the outreach on the street. So basically, if someone's having a mental health crisis or a bummer trip or whatever, and you call 911, they'll send Cahoots instead of sending the cops. So to just find out what's going on with you. And so we work a lot with them. But the problem is that you can't have people living in the wild on the streets without sanitation and security. It destroys them because the skill set you need to do that and the skill set you need to integrate into society are different skill sets.
Yeah.
And the longer you're homeless, you kind of lose the ability to function. You're living in the jungle to function in the city. And so with people living in their cars and it's in neighborhoods and they're camping in open spaces, and then you have a subset within the population of criminal vagrancy and kind of lifestyle, what we call travelers or lifestylers, that they're willing to settle for, party, steal, and that's how they, that's their life, and they're willing to settle for living in their van, and trying to push the city to take responsibility for it, which is sanctioned camping. So that's I've been spending most of my time doing that, of trying to mitigate the damage and then deal with the political system here is screwed up. We have a weak part-time city council and a strong city manager. So basically the city's kind of run like a military junta. And so that's what I've been spending a lot of my time on, is trying to mitigate the damage and trying to force the city into sanctioned camping. It's like you need places where people can go if they want help. And then you need to ban camping every place else to give everybody else relief. And there really is no other option other than that. So why are we spending all this money and tap dancing around on something that is not going to work? Because people need a place to go. And also it allows social services to get in contact with them if they know where you're going to be. Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been spending a lot of time on. Also, we've got fruit trees on our property, and I've got raised beds. And so we do like a ton of canning and, growing food and stuff like that.
You're such a hipster.
Used to be hippie, but now I'm a hipster, I guess. I infuse tequila.
Oh la la. You can send me a bottle. I'll take a bottle.
Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely, Ted. But I'm going to call this as the end to our interview. I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for chatting.